Hello, and welcome to the 2020 National Book Festival. This is the Family, Food, and Field stage, and I'm Leanne Potter. I work at the Library of Congress, and I'm delighted to be here this afternoon with authors Judith Warner and Esther Wojcicki. Judith, author of the new book, And Then They Stopped Talking to Me, Making Sense of Middle School, is well known for her 2005 New York Times bestseller, Perfect Madness, Motherhood in the Age of Anxiety, and the New York Times column, Domestic Disturbances. She is currently a senior fellow at the Center for American Progress, specializing in women's leadership and work-family policy. Esther is an internationally acclaimed journalist, award-winning educator, and pioneer in the integration of technology into the classroom. She is the founder of the Palo Alto High School Media Arts Program, which has grown to be one of the nation's most distinguished scholastic media programs. Her most recent book is How to Raise Successful People: Simple Lessons for Radical Results. If you would like to see their pre-recorded presentation at the festival, you can log into nationalbookfestival.com, or you can go straight to the Library of Congress's website at loc.gov. I am just about ready to get started. Ladies, thank you so much for being here. We are absolutely delighted to have you. And I feel really lucky because I had a chance to talk with you this summer when we did the recording. And I'd like to start our conversation before we get questions in the Q&A with a really straightforward one. What motivated you both to write your books? Judith, you want to start?
Sure. And I just want to say I'm so honored to be here. I'm so excited. We did do the recording this summer, so I got to meet both of you at that point. We had so much fun. I so enjoyed it. So I'm so glad to be back, and I'm so glad the festival is online this year and is just bringing books to everyone around the country, more people than who could have managed to come in person in DC. And I guess that was a good way to avoid answering the question. Because my answer is the same as on the recording, because it's the truth. What really brought me to the last three books, including this one, is a feeling of discomfort, and a feeling of not fitting in, which is sort of middle schoolerish, because I was in a world where things didn't make sense to me. They seemed to make sense to everyone else. And I wanted to know kind of what I was missing, what was going on. In this case, it was with this widespread belief, and the thing that I heard repeated over and over again, that, as soon as our kids got to middle school, that it was going to be horrible, it was going to be dangerous, it was going to be the worst years of their lives and of our lives, and so many new dangers were going to come upon them. And nothing that I was hearing really corresponded to my experience being that age. And I just wondered why. And the other thing was that a lot of parents started acting like middle schoolers. And I wondered about that too. So that was the feeling with this book. With Perfect Madness in 2005, it was my first experience of being a parent in the US. I'd had my kids in France. And everything was so hard. It was so insanely hard here. And everyone seemed to accept it as normal. And I thought, why? So it was the same thing both times.
And Esther, how about you? What was your motivation?
So I've been a long-time teacher, actually 40 years in the classroom. And my motivation was really to try to help parents be the most effective they could be during the teenage years, where everybody is like terrified of their own kid, and where kids are actually terrified to tell their parents what they're really doing. So how can we improve the situation for all parents and all kids? Actually, you don't just have to be a teenager or be the parent of a teenager. It starts in early childhood, starts before school, and it continues all the way through school. So that is why I was motivated to write it, because I wanted people to have a much happier, easier time to parent. And maybe a little bit like what Judith was saying, why is it so hard here in America? What is going on? And so that was my goal. We're somewhat aligned, Judith and I.
Yes, I think you are. Okay, we have a question. Alexandra is asking a question specifically to Judith. She says, those of us who read Perfect Madness around the time it was published now have kids in college and high school. Do you have any advice for these parents?
Yes. For one thing, Perfect Madness was all about control, right? About us as a generation of perfectionistic, control freak parents for a lot of good reasons that, aren't just because we're bad people. And what I think is good as the years go by, as they get to high school, and certainly once they get to college, is that you really are confronted with the limits of your power to shape and perfect and control your kids. And in many ways, I think that's a very good thing. It for those who will acknowledge it, take it in, and sort of take a deep breath and say, "Oh, good," as opposed to trying to tighten the reins more. And I think that there is this really difficult balance to achieve between giving them the freedom to explore what they need to explore and be who they need to be so that they can come to their own identity and aren't just pushing against yours. And at the same time, being sort of aware enough to be able to say something, make suggestions, if they really are having difficulties. And I think what it comes down to is being a really good active listener without judgment, listening without judgment so that you can kind of be a part of their life, right? So that you're somebody who they do want to come to, and then trying to help them figure out what they want and how to go about doing things.
Nice. Esther, I'm thinking about your book as Judith is answering, and I'm thinking about the trick that you describe in your book. And I think maybe Alexandra would find some value in some of your suggestions. You want to talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, so what Judith was talking about, I understand completely. And I mean, a lot of parents are afraid to let their kids basically take a lot of responsibility and control because they want to make sure everything is done perfectly. And so while this comes from a place of concern and good-heartedness and so forth, it works against you and it works against the kids. Because what happens is the more that you do for your children, the less empowered they are, the less they feel comfortable doing things for themselves. And so that it goes back to this acronym I have in my book, TRICK: trust, respect, independence, collaboration, and kindness. You want to trust your kids, respect their ideas. They might be a little wacky. Give them some independence, collaborate with them on decisions, and don't just dictate. And then treat them with kindness all the time, and especially if they make a mistake. So a lot of kids are afraid to tell their parents any mistakes that they make. And then that sets up this barrier between them. So I think it's really important. This TRICK model works really well. It worked well for me as a parent, worked well for me as a teacher. It works well in your interaction with other human beings. Just think about it. If you don't trust and respect your friends, then why do you have them as friends, right? So I think that is something that I have been promoting for a long time. And that's what enabled me to grow that program at Palo Alto High School from 20 kids in 1984 to almost 800 today, because we trust and respect them. And you probably want to ask yourself, where in the school system are kids trusted and respected? And I think that's really important.
I agree. The program that you started at Palo Alto High School was a media arts program. Are you finding, I know that you mentioned that you had retired from the school district, but you're certainly very involved. And this year, with so many schools being online, are you finding that your experience with the media arts program is serving you and your colleagues really well? Are there things happening that are unexpected, or what are you noticing right now?
So actually, I'm happy to say that the acronym that we used, all my colleagues use it as well. There's 6 other teachers involved. And by giving the kids a lot of trust and respect, what we've done in many cases is turn the Zoom call over to them. And most teachers might be like horrified by that. But let me tell you, it's worked like a charm, because last spring when I was teaching and doing this, the kids took over and then they published on the same schedule. They didn't lose a beat. They managed to figure out how to publish full-size newspaper, magazines from home, collaborating from all their computers. Now, I think if I would have assigned that to them, it never would have happened. But the fact that they came up with this on their own and then worked out all the kinks on their own empowered them and made them feel really proud of themselves. Well, they were amazing, to be honest, and they're continuing that this fall.
Yeah.
So I guess I'd recommend more teachers to give kids a little bit more control in those Zoom calls and don't mute them all the time, because, you know, who wants to sit in one Zoom call after another all day long being muted? It's not fun.
I agree. It's, you know, this moment when so much that is happening is new and unusual to everyone. I think you're right about especially that notion of collaboration and how can we demonstrate approaches to collaboration that are really, truly genuine because we're learning things simultaneously. Yeah.
That's right. I mean, it's very important for teachers to realize that those kids are really smart and their ideas, you might want to listen to some of the ideas that they have. And by doing that, you empower them. Can you imagine how exciting it is for a kid to say that they helped the teacher? It's pretty exciting.
Yeah, I agree. I agree. Okay, so how about both of you? What are you working on right now? What is this moment inspiring in terms of either in connection to the books you have written or things that you are working on as a result?
Judith, I think.
Okay. And I just want to backtrack 1 second to Alexander's question, because this is something that's very close to my heart that I think I often am shy in saying, and get your own house in order. That is my biggest piece of advice internally, you know, because especially in the years when your kids are adolescents and young adults, how the vibe you're giving off is the most important thing. If you are stressed, anxious, depressed, unhappy in your marriage, all of those things, they will feel it. And it will really have a deep, deep effect on them. So that's my biggest piece of advice. And I also think doing that is what makes it possible to do what Esther is describing, to have the presence of mind and the kind of clarity of spirit to do all those good things. It would be great if I could make an acronym out of Get Your House in Order, but I think it would be unpronounceable.
We'll work on it, Judith.
Oh, good. Well, you have to help me because you're good at that. In terms of what I'm working on now, I'm very excited about this. I am helping a relatively new, small political organization called Square One Politics write a guide to either new candidates or would-be candidates, or new campaign staff want to work with them to the process of running for office, like from the very start to the very finish. Their focus of the organization is in working with women, candidates of color, and LGBTQ candidates, and generally very often young candidates and people who don't come from a lot of money, who didn't, from the age of 5 plan to one day run for office. And I admire them so much, and I just am so thrilled to be able to be working with them and feel like I am doing something hopeful and positive in this moment that is and has long been so painful for so many of us.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Judith. How about you, Esther?
So continuing with my peer-to-peer work and empowering kids and giving them these opportunities. So with my former students, and one of them now is 31. So, he's no longer a long time out of school. He was a former executive at Uber. He's now the CEO of this company, which is by kids for kids. That's basically the tagline. It is peer-to-peer learning for kids online, and it just launched. We're about 3 days old,
Oh, wow.
so it's just brand new, and it's called Tract, TRACT, tract.app, and you'll see that all the what we call learning paths are created by teenagers for kids that are just a little younger. And the idea is, here's something exciting for you to do that, to make your life more exciting, especially now in this pandemic. And then we've gamified it also. So there's like a leaderboard, and there's games, and there's all kinds of stuff to try to help them be more, have a better time. Let's face it, it's a little stressful for a lot of kids. So that's what we've done. And I've been really impressed, I must say, with all these students of mine who've been passionate about doing this. And I think it shows that they really care, and that you give them an opportunity to do something really impactful, and they all want to do it.
Oh, it's great. I love that what you both have written and what you're describing about the work you're doing. In every case, the focus seems to be on empowering others, and I just think that's marvelous. We've got a question from Eve, and it's kind of long, so bear with me, but I think I can get to the heart of the question. Eve says, "Not sure how to frame this as a question. I'm working with a 6-year-old non-English speaking young person who started kindergarten a few weeks ago. Without disparaging the school district too much, it's been a disaster. The parents are challenged in navigating online, and they too are non-English speaking. I'm a social worker, not a teacher, but I've been meeting with the student often to assist her and her family with this remote learning. Do you have any suggestions on how to better get this student the support she needs?"
Well, I'll just jump in here. I think the most important thing would be to find some kind of a small group of kids that they can trust, and that is part of their sort of learning pod, where this child can play on a regular basis. Because 6-year-olds are not going to learn a language by reading a book or listening to audio tapes. They learn a language by interacting with other kids. And so it would be just even an hour a day, if they could do that, that'll make a big difference. And they learn really fast. I mean, little kids are like sponges when it comes to learning languages. And so that's, as a social worker, that's what I would see if I could find some other families where they could work. And it doesn't have to be a lot, just maybe 1 or 2 other families. And it'll make a big difference. Judith.
I would think that would make a big difference for the parents as well, because it would get them in contact with other parents in the community. I mean, if it's possible for her to find parents who are bilingual, where they could be supported. I mean, I think in general in our country, parents are so unsupported. They're left to, shoulder the burden for absolutely everything, and things that they really shouldn't have to do. And, if English is not your native language, and you haven't learned it yet, it's just about impossible. And we see all of the inequities in all of our various systems, coming to the fore now, all the more
Yes.
so with COVID and distance learning. And I think that school districts have to do a whole lot more than they're doing to take care of those who need more during this period, whether it's kids who have 2 working parents who can't work from home. There ought to be a safe space for them to go be in during the day, so that the parents don't have to worry about leaving them alone or don't lose their jobs. And this strikes me as another piece of the same problem. And we need to step up and help people, and we need to be willing to pay for it.
I agree 100%. We have to worry a lot about the parents. It's so important. And I mean, just what you said earlier, Judith, about, how the parents feel about themselves and the vibes that they give off, that impacts the whole family, impacts the kids. And you don't have to say anything. it's not like a verbal thing. It's just, it's sensed, people sense it, that you're stressed or that you're miserable or that, they can sense when you're happy too. So it's really important to help the parents. The parents really need a lot of support, and there should be in school districts special, opportunities for parents to interact. I would say at every grade level, and it would make a big difference to the parents and to the students as well.
Right. And I would say also, it would be terribly unfair to say to parents like that, what I said before, just get your house in order when they are in an intolerably stressful and anxiety-making situation.
It's awful. It really is awful. But, if you have somebody else that you can talk to about it, it makes it somewhat better. Now, it doesn't take it away, but it does make it somewhat better. And so that's what, I'd like to suggest. I mean, one of my philosophies that I talk about in the book is that you can't control life. We have a lot of bad things that are happening to us, but we can control how we react to life. And so that's the only thing within our power, is how we react to life. Because, just like 2 weeks ago, the sky was red here in California. We couldn't go outside, and we couldn't go outside for at least a week. We couldn't breathe couldn't breathe in the house. We had to run around, try to get air filters. So you never know what's coming down the path.
Yeah, and it's how you react to life on an individual level and also on a collective level.
That's right. Both. It's really important for everybody to be aware of that.
Good thoughts from both of you. Earlier this summer when we were talking, I think the idea for that initial conversation was we were going to call it Parenting for Success. And I think we started digging into just the concept of success and what does it mean to be successful. And I really like what both of you are saying about the role that we play as individuals and the role that we play as members of a community. And maybe we could dig into that a little bit more about how do we define success? What does success look like? Whether we're looking at it from the vantage point of a parent or whether we're looking at things at our, what's happening in our schools, what's happening in our community. What does success look like?
Who do you want to go first?
Judith. Well, that's the order we've been going in, so might as well keep it up.
I'm not going to answer this as well as I answered it a few months ago, but I have that as kind of a cheat sheet to remind me of sort of what I really think, which I work my way toward. But my books basically are consistently arguments against the conception of success that we tend to have as parents in our society right now, that have to do with externals, and they have to do with, money, power, influence, status. And once again, I just want to say it's not because we're bad people. We live in a very anxiety-provoking time, and human beings are always sorting themselves by status. But the problem is that those particular values and those ways of defining success, first of all, they can't apply to everyone. And secondly, they don't lead to happiness. There is research on this. Those very things pretty much always lead to unhappiness, whether you are, as values, I don't mean achieving those things necessarily mean you're going to be unhappy. Having those be your driving values is really damaging, especially for kids, especially if they feel that that's all that really matters to their parents, and that if they are not able to, conform to that narrow definition of success, that they themselves are failures. Where I finally land with this is, I think we need and want for our kids to be happy, right? We need to lead them in the direction of being the best version of themselves that they can be, who they are authentically, not who we dream them into being, not who they think they should be based on the way their classmates are or what their classmates aspire to or what pop culture tells them, but them. And, by the time they get to early adolescence, really by middle school, that sense of them is really emerging, and there is so much in that phase of life to work with, right? Because a lot of the interests that will stay with them for the rest of their lives and the inclinations and just kind of the core essence of who they are is really coming out. And unfortunately, at that age, it tends to get kind of squished if it isn't, the most narrowly mainstream sort of way of being. And, as parents, we need to celebrate what's unique and then give them the tools to be able to do what they want to do, whether in whatever way and on the most basic level, if they have any kinds of impediments, any learning disabilities, ADHD, even, mood issues, anxiety, anything like that, which are just such huge yet invisible stumbling stones. We need to do what we can to help with that. And that's often a very expensive proposition. But somebody like the social worker who, submitted the question earlier can be a very good place to start.
Nice.
So I agree 100% with what Judith just said. And the only thing that I would add to it is that I think parents need to remember that every child is like a gift from God, and they aren't going to become your clone. They are going to become who they would like to be. And if you can support that, then that will bring happiness and that will bring success. I think the most unhappy people are people that are stuck in professions or lives that they didn't want to be stuck in, and they were pleasing their grandparents or their parents or somebody, but not themselves. So help your child begin to understand who they are and what they want to succeed in life with, and then support that. So
I'm sorry to continue.
Go ahead. What were you going to say?
I just wanted to say that once again, I agreed with you so much. And the idea of not having your child be your clone, the problem is that sometimes it is completely unconscious when you're doing it. You think you're not, you hold that value, and sometimes it smacks you in the face. That's what young adult children are for. And that's partly what makes it so tough.
Right, that's right. Sometimes you aren't aware of what you're doing, and so it has to be on the conscious level, and that's what I say in my book. You have to make it on the conscious level, because sometimes you will repeat the mistakes that your parents made with you that you say you would never do, and then you do them anyway. So if it's on the conscious level, then you don't do it, or you at least have a better chance of not doing it. And so that's what I think of success. If I just look at my three daughters, my oldest daughter, Susan, who's the CEO of YouTube, she majored in French and English history. And then when she graduated, I said, so now what are you going to do? And her answer was, I was like, oh my God, we just spent all this money on her education. She's like, I don't know. I was like, maybe you should have thought about it before you went to college, whatever. So, I think you want to support them in whatever they want to do, and getting to the top or getting to the position that they want to be in, whatever the top is for them, I have a little chart that shows it. There's like a lot of different failures that go on in between. There's no straight route to the success. You have to try a lot of things. And so we need to remind parents of that so that they can be a little bit more patient and give their kids these opportunities. And now with this pandemic, it's even worse, because they thought they knew what they were going to do, and now they don't even know what they're going to do. And so, don't put any pressure on them. The pressure's on already. Just be understanding if possible.
There's an article in this weekend's Wall Street Journal about people whose gears had to change as a result of the pandemic. And I have to say, many of those stories are very uplifting, because they're people who are doing things they always wanted to do, but never felt compelled to take the chances. And now we're sort of forced to. But sort of speaks to what you just said. By the way, Eve, who asked the question a little bit ago, she just sent you guys a note saying, beautiful responses, thank you.
We like Eve.
Very nice. Very nice.
Appreciate it.
I know. Well, I hate to say it, but our time is almost up. But before we go, I wanted to ask both of you about your hopes for your readers in terms of, what is it that you're really, when someone sits down with your books and cracks them open and begins to read, what is your hope for them in terms of what are they going to get out of your book? What sort of a connection are you hoping for? Do you have anything you want to say to your readers?
In my case, and with this book, I think it's especially strong. Peace of mind, feeling better. The middle school years are really hard, especially for parents. And there are so many questions that we have that go unanswered. We feel we're in a lot of turmoil and we don't know why. And we're more isolated from other parents than we were at any other phase. Largely, I think, because everyone is having a hard time. And I learned so much in the course of doing this research. So much. And a lot of it's in the footnotes, which eat up a whole third of the book, which are you not required to read. But it was so helpful to me. Even, by the time I finished it, my daughters were completely done with that phase of life. But these were things that helped me in general, just in understanding social encounters and understanding how our experiences in this formative period can affect us in the future. So I hope that readers can read it and feel just better, learn more, even if they don't have middle schoolers right now. And also, and this is always the thing in my writing, feel less alone. Know that there are a lot of other people out there who feel exactly like you do.
Oh, fabulous. Esther, how about you?
So I'm hoping that parents will use this as a model. Actually, I found that some school districts are giving it out to kindergarten parents as a way for them to think about parenting through their entire stretch of the school years and beyond. Because if you just think about the trick philosophy, if you give even a small child some trust and responsibility and respect, maybe just to do something like make dinner or make the dessert for dinner tonight, just little things like this, it makes a difference to those kids. The fact that their parents respect them and give them this responsibility to do things, it makes a huge difference. And so if we can have that established, especially the collaboration part where the communication is open between parent and child, you will hopefully whiz through those middle school years because they will talk to you about what their problems are. And you want them to, even if you don't agree with them, don't jump in and tell them what to do. Be an active listener. And that will make a huge difference. And so that's what I'm hoping will happen with all parents. If we can help them feel better about their parenting and that it will all turn out okay and they can relax, that would be my goal for my book.
Oh, I love it. Now, I've read both of your books, and one of the things I love the most about them is that as I read them, I can hear your voices. And I love what both of you said about knowing that we're not alone, because I think that is absolutely the sense that one will get in reading what you've written. So thank you both. And like I said, our time is up, and I'm sorry about that. But I certainly, on behalf of the Library of Congress, thank you for generously sharing your time with us this afternoon. Or morning, as it may be if you're on the West Coast. Once again, we have been speaking with Judith Warner and Esther Wojcicki, whose latest books are And Then They Stopped Talking to Me, Making Sense of Middle School, and How to Raise Successful People, Simple Lessons for Radical Results. Thanks as well to our audience, and I hope you all enjoy the remainder of the National Book Festival.